These 8 chilling stories, documented through recovered footage and eyewitness accounts, reveal disturbing patterns that park officials can't ignore. From remote campsites to popular trails, something sinister stalks the shadows. What these survivors experienced will make you think twice about your next outdoor adventure. I've been solo hiking for years, but what I found that day at Silent Overlook still makes my skin crawl. Even 3 years later, I catch myself looking over my shoulder on trails I used to know by heart. The morning started like any other weekend trek. I packed light, just the essentials for a day hike through Mount Baker National Forest. My roommate Mia thought I was crazy to go alone, but I needed the solitude. 80-hour weeks in the ER left me craving something real, quiet, and mine. The trail was unusually quiet that Saturday, the kind of silence that sharpens your senses, the crunch of pine needles underfoot, the whisper of wind through branches. I'd been hiking for about 3 hours when I caught the faint scent of wood smoke. It grew stronger as I approached Silent Overlook. I checked my phone. 11:47 a.m. The camping area came into view and everything felt wrong. The site was pristine, almost too pristine. A tent was perfectly pitched, 2 camping chairs arranged around a fire pit where flames still burned. It looked staged, like a display in an outdoor store, but the fire was real. At first I thought the campers had just stepped away, but then I saw the food. 2 plates sat on the picnic table, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee steaming in metal mugs. The food wasn't just warm, it was hot, like someone had walked away mid-breakfast. A jar of strawberry jam was open, a knife resting in it, leaving sticky red prints on the table. "Hello?" My voice sounded small against the trees. No response. I approached the table and noticed the details: a paperback novel, a pair of reading glasses, a half-finished crossword puzzle with the last word written in neat capital letters: vanish. My hands were shaking as I tried calling the ranger station. No signal, of course not. There never was at Silent Overlook. The isolation that once felt comforting now made my chest tight. I searched the area, calling out again and again, my voice growing more desperate. Nothing, just the crackle of the fire, steam rising from untouched mugs, and something else, a metallic smell like copper pennies. That's as when I saw the backpack half hidden under the tent's rainfly. It was unzipped, its contents spilling out. A wallet, keys, a phone with a cracked screen still displaying 11:23 a.m. 24 minutes before I arrived, the Rangers found me there an hour later after I finally got through. They searched a 20-mile radius, interviewed hikers, and checked every trail and ravine. They found traces: a single hiking boot by a stream, a torn piece of jacket on a branch, a camera with its memory card missing. The investigation went cold. They said maybe the campers left suddenly due to an emergency, but that didn't explain the fresh food, the burning fire, or the copper smell. The campsite's owners were never identified. The wallet was empty, ID slots torn clean through. The phone was locked, no fingerprints except mine. I had to explain that again and again. I still hike, but never alone now. I've learned things about that area, about other hikers who found strange things at Silent Overlook, always on Saturday mornings, always around the same time, always finding fresh coffee, steaming mugs, and food still hot on the table. Sometimes when the wind moves through the trees just right, I swear I can smell coffee and wood smoke. But beneath it is always that other smell, copper pennies. Last week, Mia showed me a local hiking blog post about Silent Overlook. It mentioned how the area used to be called something else. Before 1998 and before they found the first abandoned campsite, the first perfectly arranged breakfast, still steaming in the morning air. The article described one chilling detail. In over 30 years of disappearances, every case involved the same crossword puzzle, always half-finished, always with the same word written last: vanish. I've started digging into the history of Silent Overlook, combing through old newspaper archives. I've found connections, patterns, things that don't make sense. But the strangest part? Every person who's investigated these disappearances has reported the same thing: the smell of copper pennies getting stronger. I can't believe I'm writing this. My hands are shaking, but I need to tell someone what happened on the Pacific Crest Trail 3 years ago has been driving me crazy. And yeah, I know how this is going to sound. My best friend Mary and I were doing a section hike in Northern California. We weren't newbies, we'd been hiking together since college. Mary was the one who got me into backpacking, always pushing me out of my comfort zone with her crazy adventures. We spent months planning the trip. Mary was ridiculously organized. Our shared Google Doc was color-coded. We even spent a weekend dehydrating meals. Mary wouldn't stop complaining about my curry stinking up her apartment. God, I miss her laugh. The first weird thing happened on day one. We passed a trail counter, one of those metal boxes that click when you walk by. Mary, being Mary, made a big deal about it. Look, hikers 2,847 and 2,848. She even made me take a picture. The first 2 days were perfect. Clear skies, great temps, everything felt normal. Until day 3. We stopped for lunch near the counter. I was mid-complain about Mary hogging the dried mango when she grabbed my arm. The counter now said 2,845. Probably broken, we told ourselves. But something about it felt wrong. You know that gut feeling when something's off, but you can't explain why? That night we camped with a guy named Marcus, tall with a scar above his eyebrow. At first he seemed nice, but he kept looking at us when he thought we weren't watching. His questions were weird, specific. Where were we headed? Did we have a satellite phone? Was anyone expecting us? I woke up to Mary shaking my tent. Marcus was gone. His tent, sleeping bag, and backpack were all there exactly as he had left them. But Marcus, gone. We waited for hours, even checked his stuff. Huge no-no in hiker culture. But we were scared. His phone was dead. His wallet had one photo, a group of hikers. I didn't think much of it at the time. The trail counter read 2,844. We started keeping track, taking pictures of everyone we met, writing descriptions in Mary's pink notebook. The German couple with matching backpacks, the woman with the red bandana and her pit bull Luna, the guy with the fancy silver trekking pole. 5 days in, we passed the counter again. 2,039. 6 people we'd met were gone, including Marcus, including that German couple who'd cracked us up with their attempts at American slang. Then we noticed the side trails. They weren't on any maps, not even Mary's GPS. They looked too perfect, winding into the trees like they were waiting. Mary wanted to check them out. She was always braver than me, but something in my gut screamed to stay away. I should have stopped her. The next morning, Mary was gone. Her sleeping bag was still warm, her boots in their usual spot. Her Kindle was on her pillow, battery dead. But Mary, just gone. I ran. I didn't even pack up, just grabbed my phone and ran 6 miles to the road. Called search and rescue. They found everything exactly as I said. 2 mugs of half-drunk coffee, Mary's journal open to her last entry. But no Mary, no footprints, nothing. The police filed reports, search teams combed the area, missing person posters went up, but it was like she disappeared into thin air. I check the trail registry sometimes, hoping to see her name, or their names, but there's nothing. Last month, I worked up the nerve to look through the police files. I found that photo from Marcus's wallet, and there she was, Mary, standing with 6 other hikers, 3 weeks before our trip, before I'd even met her. The counter read 2,832 last time I drove past. I don't hike anymore. I've worked as a camp host at dozens of state parks over the years, but what happened at Evergreen Point still keeps me up at night. The job seemed perfect when I started last May. Just me and my rescue dog, Charlie, greeting campers, checking reservations, and enjoying the peace of the forest. The park was remote enough to feel wild, but not so isolated that I felt nervous. And usually, I'd move it there after my divorce, looking for a fresh start. The little host cabin became my sanctuary, knotty pine walls, a wood-burning stove, and windows overlooking towering Douglas firs. For the first time in years, I could breathe again. That changed 3 weeks into. One evening, I was reviewing the reservation book while rain drummed on the cabin's roof. Charlie was curled at my feet. Something caught my eye as I flipped through the pages. A pattern. Every third campsite was reserved under different names, but the handwriting was identical. Neat, precise letters with the same downward sloping T's. Even the pen pressure matched. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe the system was assigning spots automatically, but these were paper forms filled out in person. I checked older books, my hands shaking. The pattern went back months, years maybe. The names sounded almost real, but not quite. John Thember, Maria Castellet, Robert Winglish, names that made you do a double take. I started watching those third sites. The campers arrived after dark, never checked in, and left before dawn. They left nothing behind, not even a blade of grass out of place. Regular campers never noticed anything strange. They'd chat with me about hiking trails and bear safety, completely unaware of the silent visitors, 3 sites down. I wanted to warn them, but what would I say? One night I walked past Site As 12, one of the third sites, during my evening rounds. The air felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Charlie went rigid beside me, his hackles raised, growling low. The site looked empty at first, no tent, no car. But then I saw movement, shadows shifting between the trees. With trembling hands, I clicked on my flashlight. The beam caught 3 figures standing perfectly still among the pines. They wore dark clothes and stared at me, motionless. Their faces were too smooth, too symmetrical, like masks made of skin. Charlie's growl turned into furious barking. I backed away, gripping his collar. When we reached the main path, I ran, hearing footsteps behind us, perfectly in sync, like a march. I called the park ranger, but he was hours away handling another emergency. I double-checked my locks and tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching me through the darkness. The next morning, I checked Site 12. It was empty, like always, but pinned to a tree was a note in that same precise handwriting. "We'll take Site 15 next. See you soon." Below the message was a strange symbol, like a circle with too many angles. I quit that afternoon, packed my things, and drove straight to the nearest police station. They took my statement, but without evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. One officer suggested I was just stressed from working alone. Sometimes I check Evergreen Point's reservation logs online. The pattern continues. Every third site, different names, same handwriting. I don't know what those figures were doing in the dark, and part of me doesn't want to find out. But I think about the new camp hosts and wonder if they've noticed yet. Charlie won't go near state parks anymore. Smart dog. He sensed that something was wrong long before I did. These days, we stick to camping in my backyard, where I can see all the exits and know exactly who made the reservations. But sometimes, lying in my tent on a quiet night, I imagine those figures standing in the darkness, waiting, watching, planning their next visit to site number 3, and I wonder if they know where I live now. I wish I'd never looked at that registry book, but when you reach the summit of Mount Wilson, you just do. It's tradition. Every hiker signs it. After 53 successful summits, I thought I'd seen it all. That morning was perfect. Crisp air that burned your lungs a little. I started my hike at 6 a.m., earlier than usual. The trail conditions were just right, with the recent rain tamping down the dust. My boyfriend Tom usually joined me, but he had a work conference in Phoenix. He texted that morning, "Be safe up there, check in when you're back." I smiled at his protectiveness. I'd been hiking these trails for years. So there I was, solo hiking on a Thursday morning in October. The rhythmic click of my poles against the rocky trail, the golden light of the rising sun. It was a scene I'd lived so many times before. The summit registry sits in a weathered metal box bolted to a boulder near the lookout point. It's nothing special, just a dented Forest Service issue box, but it's tradition, and I'd signed it dozens of times. As I flipped through the pages, something caught my eye. Names were missing, not torn out or crossed off, just gone. I only noticed because I recognized some of them. Nika Polly, who runs the local hiking group, had signed it 2 Thursdays ago. Her note about the hawk migration was gone. I kept flipping back. Every Thursday entry for the past 3 months, completely blank. I remembered seeing Mark from my office sign it last Thursday. He'd even borrowed my pen and joked about signing his life away. The entries for other days were all there, hundreds of names and comments about the weather. But Thursdays? Just empty lines. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. I turned, heart pounding. A man stood there wearing a bright orange safety vest. maybe a park ranger, but something felt off. His vest was too clean, too new. No dust, no name tag, no patch. "Beautiful morning for a hike," he said, smiling, but his eyes stayed cold, calculating. "Checking the registry?" I slammed the book shut. My mouth was dry and fast, just signing in. He stepped closer, gravel crunching loudly under his boots. "Interesting reading, isn't it? Especially the Thursday entries." My legs tensed. The trail down was behind him, and the drop-offs on either side were sheer cliffs. My mind raced for an escape. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "most people don't notice the pattern. They just sign and move on. But you noticed, just like Nika did, just like Mark did." I gripped my hiking poles, sweat slicking the rubber grips, calculated the distance to the trail. His radio crackled, static and fragments of words I couldn't make out. Something about containment and procedure. He glanced down at it for a second. I ran, not toward the trail, that's what he'd expect. I scrambled down the rocky face of the summit instead. My poles caught between rocks, my hands scraped raw against granite. But I didn't stop. I heard him calling after me, his voice echoing off the mountains. "We'll find you eventually. Everyone signs the registry. Everyone." I kept going, scrambling down the steep slope until I found another trail, one I'd never seen before. I made it to my car, hands shaking, and drove home, checking the rearview mirror the entire way. The police didn't believe me. They checked the registry themselves and found nothing unusual. All the Thursday entries were there, including Nika's and Mark's. I called Nika's hiking group last week, asked about her. They'd never heard of her, said they'd never had a leader by that name. I went to Mark's desk at work. Someone else was sitting there. Everyone acted like he'd never existed. I never used to be afraid of hiking alone. That was my thing, solo trips into the wilderness to clear my head and escape the chaos of the city. But after last October, I don't go into the woods alone anymore. I'm part of an online hiking group where we share trail recommendations and safety tips. Last fall, people kept posting about a weird smell near the North Trail at Blackwood State Park. Not a campfire smell, something chemical. Wrong. I ignored it, assuming it was just kids messing around. Then my best friend Christy brought it up. She's into nature photography and spends weekends on the trails. One night she called me, totally freaked out. She'd been near an old campsite when her camera started glitching, and the smell, burning plastic mixed with something worse, made her dizzy and sick. I should have listened to her warning, but curiosity got the better of me, especially when things didn't add up. I started researching the park and found out about Site 23, a campsite destroyed in a flood in the 80s. It shouldn't exist anymore, but GPS apps kept leading people right to it. I decided to check it out, downloaded the coordinates from the hiking group, packed my day bag, and set off on what I thought would be a normal hike. The trail started off fine, crisp autumn air, leaves crunching underfoot. But as I followed the GPS, the air grew heavy, like walking through invisible smoke. My phone started glitching, and then I smelled it. Christy was right. The smell wasn't like anything I'd experienced. It burned my eyes and made my head spin, but I kept going. I had to know. I reached a clearing and froze. There was a campsite, fresh, a fire pit with warm ashes, tent stakes in the ground, but the ground around it was wrong. Everything within a perfect circle was black and dead, like something had poisoned the earth. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but the camera wouldn't work. The screen glitched, showing random coordinates. Then I saw something chilling. My photo gallery was full of pictures I never took, all of that same spot, different times, different seasons. In every photo, the black circle was there. The burning smell got stronger and my phone went haywire. Apps opening and closing. Static sounds almost like voices. I ran, didn't stop until I reached my car. Called the park rangers from the parking lot and told them everything. They sent a team to investigate, but when they got there, nothing. No campsite, no black circle, no burning smell, just an overgrown clearing. It was like it never existed. The photos on my phone? Gone. But my call history still showed I'd talked to Christy that night. When I tried calling her back, her number was disconnected. I drove to her apartment. Her roommate said she hadn't seen Christy in days. She'd gone hiking and never returned. Her last Instagram post was a smiling photo of herself at a campsite. The location tag read Site 23. The police searched for weeks, but found nothing. Yet new photos still appear on her cloud storage. Pictures of that same campsite, the black circle getting bigger in each shot. The timestamps and coordinates make no sense. I deleted my hiking apps and threw away my GPS devices. I started seeing a therapist, but it hasn't helped much. Sometimes late at night, my phone buzzes with a notification, a new photo from Christy's account, always of that impossible campsite. And sometimes when I drive past the park, I catch that smell again, just for a second. My phone's GPS will switch on by itself, pointing to a location that shouldn't exist, to Site 23, where Christy's still uploading photos, where the black circle keeps growing, where something is always burning. I've thought about going back to find her, but then I remember the voice in the static and the dead poisoned ground. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe some places should stay lost. I keep telling myself there has to be a logical explanation, but logic doesn't explain why 3 people have vanished from my trails in the past month. The worst part is, I think I might be next. I've been a backcountry guide in the Cascades for 12 years. Know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every ridge, every valley, every seasonal stream. Every tree feels like an old friend, but lately, something feels different out here, boy. The familiar has become strange. Even the air feels wrong somehow. It started with Nick's disappearance. He was an experienced hiker, done this route half a dozen times before. I remember checking his gear at the trailhead that morning. Everything was perfect. GPS, emergency beacon, supplies for 3 days. The weather was clear. Trail conditions were ideal. We joked about the bears being more afraid of his singing than he should be of them. 3 days later, search and rescue found his camp. Everything was still there, tent set up, sleeping bag laid out, phone charging on his portable battery pack. His coffee mug was still warm. But no Nick, no signs of animal activity or struggle. He was just gone, like he'd vanished into thin air between one step and the next. I noticed the mark in the next day, a small symbol carved into a Douglas fir near his campsite, 3 lines intersecting in the middle like a crooked star. Fresh, too. The wood was still pale where it had been cut. The sap hadn't even started flowing yet. A week later, Maya Williams disappeared. Different trail, same story. Camp intact, no signs of disturbance. Her journal was open to an entry about watching the sunset. And there it was again, that symbol, carved into a tree at eye level, maybe 2 days old, just like before. I started photographing every marking I found, comparing them. They were identical down to the depth of the cuts, like they'd been made with the same tool by the same hand. I reported it to the rangers, but they dismissed it. Said it was probably just trail markers from other hikers. Said I was getting paranoid after the disappearances. But I knew better. I've been watching these trees for over a decade. These symbols, they weren't here before. They showed up days before each disappearance. Always fresh cuts, always the same design. Always followed by an empty camp and another missing person report. Then Jenny Park vanished last week. I'd warned her, told her to camp away from any marked trees. She thought I was being overcautious. Maybe I was, but when they found her abandoned camp yesterday, there it was, that damn symbol, carved into a cedar not 20 feet from her tent. Her headlamp was still on, casting shadows through her tent walls. I'm out here now, following a hunch, checking every campsite along the popular routes. My hands shake every time I spot a fresh marking. 3 more so far, all new, all carved within the last few days. The bark around them still shows the clean edges of recent cuts. The sun's getting low, and the shadows between the trees are growing longer. I should head back, I know I should, but I keep thinking about those empty camps, those fresh cuts in the bark, the way each missing person seemed to vanish between one moment and the next. Someone is out here, someone who knows these trails almost as well as I do, someone who's watching, waiting. I'm standing at a fork in the path. To my right, the main trail leads back to the ranger station. To my left, a less traveled route leads to some remote campsites. And there, on a young pine tree, I see it. Fresh wood shave-in still scattered on the ground below. The symbol, newly carved, probably within the last hour. My radio crackles. Base to Jamie, come in. The ranger's voice sounds tinny and far away, like it's coming from another world entirely. I key the mic. Rachel here. My voice sounds steady, calmer than I feel. We've got 2 more hikers checking in for overnight camping, heading to the Northridge sites. I stare at the fresh marking, at the trail leading into deepening shadows, at the wood shaving that look almost like snow in the fading light. Tell them, my voice catches. Tell them to wait. I'm coming back to escort them myself. I've spent my whole life in these mountains. They've always felt like home. Safe, familiar, but now, every rustle of leaves makes me jump. Every snapping twig sounds like footsteps. Every shadow holds secrets I'm afraid to uncover because someone is marking my trails and they're marking them for a reason. I take one last look at the symbol, at the fresh cut still weeping sap, and I realize something that makes my blood run cold. The 3 lines. They're not random, they're pointing somewhere, and if I'm right about what they mean, about where they're leading, I just hope I can figure it out before anyone else disappears, or before whatever's taken them decides to come for me. I used to love hiking alone. It was my thing, solo trips into the wilderness to clear my head and escape the chaos of the city. But after last summer on the Canyon Ridge detour, I can't hike without looking over my shoulder. The main trail was closed for maintenance due to spring floods, so everyone had to take the alternate route. It was actually prettier, winding through old-growth pines with better valley views. The detour added an extra mile, but the wildflowers, purple lupines and orange paintbrush, made it worth it. I'd done my research, checked trail maps, and posted my route on social media. You know, being a responsible solo hiker. The parking lot was full, but most hikers were already heading back. It was late afternoon and shadows were stretching across the trail. The air was cooler when I met him, an older man in a Forest Service cap, sitting on a fallen log. Binoculars hung around his neck, and he smiled warmly, instantly putting me at ease. He asked if I was enjoying the detour and mentioned my post about hiking it. My stomach tightened. I hadn't mentioned which trail I was taking. He knew more, and it's my regular Thursday hikes, my favorite lookout point. The lighting's perfect. They're around 5 p.m. It's great for Instagram. My heart raced. I'd never posted about that spot, or when I hiked. I kept calm, adjusted my pack straps, and told him I needed to finish before dark. His smile shifted, harder this time. Don't worry, I know you're a fast hiker. You'll make it back in plenty of time. You always do this loop in under 3 hours. The temperature seemed to drop. How long had he been watching me? I walked faster, but I kept hearing footsteps. When I stopped, they stopped. When I sped up, so did they. Twigs snapped, leaves crunched, sometimes close, sometimes far. Like he was playing with me. The forest that had felt so welcoming now seemed suffocating. Every bird call made me jump. Every shadow looked like him. I reached a split in the trail as the sun sank low, painting everything in deep orange. Right led back to the parking lot. Left went to my favorite lookout point. He was right. The light would be perfect. But I could still hear those footsteps. I turned right, away from my usual route. The footsteps grew louder. I grabbed my phone, no signal. My satellite beacon felt heavy in my pack, but using it meant stopping, meant giving him time to catch up. Then his voice came closer than I expected. Taking the short way back, that's not like you. Don't you want to see the sunset? Your followers are probably expecting it. I ran, full sprint, pack bouncing, lungs burning, branches whipped my face, my boots pounded the trail, almost drowning out his footsteps. Almost, I could hear his breathing now, heavy, excited. I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. As I pulled out of the lot, I saw him, standing at the edge of the trees, still smiling, still wearing that Forest Service cap. He waved, like we were old friends. The Rangers found nothing when I reported it. No Forest Service employee matching his description worked in the park. But 3 other women reported similar encounters that week, all solo hikers. All of them had posted their plans online. The main trail reopened 2 weeks later. They never caught him, never figured out how he knew so much about us. Our routes, our schedules, our habits. I still hike, but never alone. I never share my location anymore, and deleted most of my old hiking photos, especially the ones from my favorite lookout. Sometimes, on crowded trails, I catch myself studying friendly faces, looking for that warm smile that knows too much, watching for Forest Service caps. And I wonder if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting for another hiker to take that detour. I should have listened to my doctor when she warned me about camping alone, but after my stem cell treatment, I was desperate to prove I could still do normal things, even if it meant being extra careful. I'd chosen this remote campsite specifically because it promised isolation. Just me, my sanitized gear, and 3 days of peace in the Cascade Mountains. That's what the brochure promised anyway. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was, thinking I could handle everything on my own. The storm changed everything. My first 2 days were perfect, quiet, just the kind of solitude I needed after months of hospital rooms and beeping monitors. I'd set up my tent on a small ridge overlooking Pine Lake, carefully sanitizing every surface, just like my nurses taught me. The air was crisp and clean, exactly what my recovering body needed. Then they arrived. I first noticed something was off about my neighbors on day 2. The couple had seemed nice enough when they pulled up in their muddy Subaru. Thaddeus and Meridian, they said, setting up their tent about 50 yards from mine. Close enough to see, far enough for comfort. At least that's what I thought at the time. The rain started that afternoon, not regular rain, sheets of it, turning the ground into soup. The park ranger's warning crackled through my emergency radio. Flooding had taken out the access road. We were stuck here for at least 48 hours. I watched Thaddeus and Meridian through my tent window that evening, hunched over their camping stove. Their movements seemed different, jerky, like they were arguing, but I couldn't hear anything over the rain. The way they moved reminded me of those nature documentaries where they speed up the footage of insects. Something about it made my skin crawl. That night, I woke to footsteps splashing outside. My heart nearly stopped when I saw Thaddeus standing in the downpour, staring at the lake. Just standing there for hours. His clothes were soaked through, but he never moved, never shivered. The rain kept falling, and I kept watching, too terrified to make a sound. When morning came, Meridian was filling water bottles at their campsite, over and over and over, like she'd forgotten she'd just filled them. Her hands were shaking, but her face was completely blank, empty. I got that feeling in my gut, the one that says something is very wrong. I tried my phone again, no signal. The ranger station was miles away through flooded trails. I was trapped here with them. My immune system was still fragile. I couldn't risk getting sick if there was something in their water supply making them act strange. But what if it wasn't the water? What if they were always like this? What if they chose this spot, waiting for someone vulnerable, someone alone? I spent that day pretending to read, watching them from behind my book. They paced their campsite in perfect circles. Sometimes they'd stop and stare at my tent, their heads tilted at identical angles, wrong angles. I checked my supplies. I had enough bottled water to last 4 more days. If I rationed carefully, I could make it. I had to make it. The third night, I heard them whispering out at my tent. Their voices didn't sound human anymore, like they were trying to remember how to form words. "She's awake. We know you're awake." I clutched my emergency beacon, the one my doctor insisted I bring. One press would send my coordinates to search and rescue. But what would I tell them? That my neighbors were acting weird, that I was scared of nothing, that I'd watched too many horror movies. The voices got closer. "Come out, drink with us, the water wants you too." Something scraped against my tent. Fingers, claws? The beacon felt hot in my palm. Their shadows loomed against my tent wall. Twisted, wrong, like their bodies were bending in ways they shouldn't. I heard the sound of water sloshing in bottles. Dozens of bottles. Just one sip, and you'll understand. I pressed the button. I've replayed that night so many times, trying to make sense of it. Search and rescue found me huddled in my sleeping bag the next morning, severely dehydrated but alive. Thaddeus and Meridian's tent was empty, just dozens of water bottles scattered around their site. all of them filled with lake water. Some of the bottles had teeth marks around the rims. Human teeth marks. The ranger said there was no record of anyone else checking into the campground that week. No evidence anyone had been there at all. No footprints in the mud except mine. They tested the lake water, found nothing unusual, just regular mountain runoff. But I know what I saw. Sometimes I dream about their voices, about what might have happened if I'd taken just one sip of water, about what they really wanted from me, about the way their bodies moved in the rain. The doctors say my immune system is stronger now, but I don't go camping anymore, and sometimes, when it rains really hard.